Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1025B, and today's date is July 18th, 2016, and the title of the episode is the Turkish coup being used for something much bigger? Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, we understand at this point that the U.S. government and the powers that be, they are pushing a race war, a war against authority, and they are pushing quite hard because we've seen this shooting in Baton Rouge where there was this Gavin Eugene. He went out and he killed 3, wounding 3 others, and he was in the military. And we can see right now that they're trying to push this as hard as they possibly can, because when we look at the situation and we look at what's going on here in the U.S. and around the world, the economic system is collapsing. I mean, that is a fact. We've been documenting it. We've been tracking it. We know the economic indicators, they're declining rapidly. The narrative that we have improved the economy, that we're recovered, is completely falling apart. And we can see that the world is reeling from everything that the U.S. has done. And their last objective is to get the people fighting with each other, not just here in the United States, but in other countries, take away more rights of the people, create more laws, start a war to cover up what is coming. And we can see what they're doing is they're really pushing the idea that we have a major problem in this country. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, yes, we do. Well, the corporate media continually comes out and they keep repeating the same thing over and over and over until everyone believes there is a problem. This is what they've done many times before, and they're doing it now. And we can see that this person, and it doesn't even matter, these false flags, it doesn't even matter going through each one of them anymore, because we realize this is the agenda of the U.S. government central bankers. And we can see that they're even pushing the idea that this person was part of an anti-government group. Remember, they moved their entire way of thinking away from terrorism. Now, there are certain parts of the government that are saying, yes, it's Islamic State and things like that we've seen. But if you notice, the president and Jay Johnson, who backs the president, they continually use the words domestic terrorism. That we have a problem with the people in the United States. This is our main concern. The people here who are against the government. Because what they're worried about is an uprising. And they're trying to basically squash it right now. They're trying to stop it. To say, look, these are crazy people out here. They're anti-government. They're part of patriot groups. Tax activists. They're part of militias. You don't want to be any part of this. These are the crazy people. And it looks like this is part of their agenda, to say that these groups are attacking the police. These groups are a problem. And while they're doing this, they're trying to push race wars. They're doing all of this at once. This is mainly a distraction. This is a major distraction here in the United States from what is really coming. Because as we can see, many things are occurring at once. The Middle East is completely out of control. We have this coup in Turkey. The U.S. right now is losing its edge in Syria, which they've been fighting to remove that leader for 6 years or so, because they thought eventually they'd get into Iran. They made a nuclear agreement with Iran, thinking they'd be able to get in their central banks and have them use the dollar on their natural resources, on oil. But Iran finally came out and said, no, we're not going to be using the dollar. Sorry about that. And this is a major problem for the U.S. So while everything falls apart, they need to distract everyone. They need to keep the people fighting amongst each other. And this is one of their agendas. Very interestingly, where they keep telling us there's, problems with weapons, and we can see they want to take our weapons away. And it's not because of the reasons they're telling us, it's because they're very nervous about the American person having a weapon, because it's a threat to their authority. But if you look at the real statistics, and you look at what's going on here, you see that actually the homicide rate is the lowest since 1905. And if you go back in time, during, let's say, Prohibition, when it began, when it ended, when it reached its peak, very oddly, this was a government operation, the homicide rate increased. As soon as Prohibition ended, the homicide rate dropped down. When the U.S. government came out and said we're conducting the war on drugs, the homicide rate spiked. It stayed up there. As soon as the states moved to allow concealed carry permits, all of a sudden the homicide rate started to drop. As more and more people purchased weapons, because of all these false flags, because we know the number of checks with the FBI has increased dramatically, gun sales are through the roof, homicide rates have dropped. But guns are the problem. It's very interesting because during the presidency of Obama, we've seen many mass shootings. Very oddly, most of them, we realize, are complete false flags to push their agendas. And we can see the government is becoming more and more desperate as we move forward. Now, out in South Korea, we know the U.S. and South Korea came up with an agreement to have the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, and they placed it in the mountainous region near Seoul in South Korea. Now the United States and South Korea are saying, well, North Korea is operating more than 1,000 missiles, and the 48 interceptors that we placed in South Korea, it's not enough. We need more. So now they're talking about bringing in more of these interceptors. Out in Sudan, we see the president is ready to send in 200 U.S. forces now. They're on standby in Uganda, and they're ready to go into South Sudan at a moment's notice. So it looks like we'll be bringing a lot more troops into this region. I know they brought in, 54 or so to help out with the personnel in the embassy, but it looks like now they're getting ready to bring in more forces into the area to garrison the country, to protect their assets, which is the oil. And we can see this is happening to each and every one of the countries they decided to go into back in 2001, where General Wesley Clark came out with his list, said this will be completed by 2008. We'll have Iran, we'll have Syria, we'll have Lebanon, we'll have Libya, we'll have Yemen, we'll have Sudan, we'll have Iraq. All these countries right now, the whole thing's falling apart. The U.S. now needs to go back into these countries to maintain control. Because the people in each one of these countries are saying, you know something? We're done with this. In Ukraine, where the U.S. had another coup d'etat, we see that is not going well. Actually, Russia's FSB security service said on Monday it caught an employee of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe spying for Ukraine, passing sensitive military information about what is happening in the southeastern section of Ukraine. It has clear evidence that they were working for Kiev. And we know that Kiev right now is probing the contact line, moving closer and closer to these regions. We see that the U.S., Ukraine, Germany, They're going to be flying over each of their countries using the Open Skies Treaty. So the U.S. and Ukrainian pilots will perform a joint observation flight over Russia, while the Russian observers will fly over Germany. And of course, when they fly over Russia, they're going to see there's no troop buildups. They're going to see Russia's not getting ready to invade. But of course, the corporate media, the propaganda is going to be out there saying that they're ready to invade, they're ready to go into the country. But of course, they'll never show any proof because it's all propaganda. Because what they're getting ready for is another offensive. Because the central banks, they still didn't get what they paid for. They didn't complete the Minsk II ceasefire agreement. And we can see the U.S. and other forces, the UK, Poland, they've been bringing in lethal weapons. They've been training the armed forces in Ukraine, all for one reason and one reason only. And we're just waiting for the big bang to go off. And that should be coming up very, very soon. Now, on Friday, July 15th, there was a coup in Turkey, and we discussed this over the weekend. And we have to think to ourselves, why did this happen at this point? I mean, think about it. Why was there a coup? And we can see many other countries around the world, they're putting up travel alerts saying do not go to Turkey at this time. It is very dangerous. And many countries are looking to get their people out of Turkey. But when we look at Turkey's official version of the coup, they're saying that there was a small military faction and it was controlled by Gulen, who lives in Pennsylvania, who is a CIA asset, by the way. And we can see that everything is being blamed on him right now. And right now, Erdogan is completely purging his country. But when we look at the details of what has happened, we see that many things don't make sense. So while this coup was taking place, Erdogan's Gulfstream 4, flight number TK8456, took off from Bodrum's airport at 1:43 a.m. and flew for hours over Turkey's northwest with its transponder on, undisturbed. It was from the presidential plane, while still landed, that Erdogan had gone on FaceTime and then on the air and managed to control the counter-coup. The plane never left Turkish airspace and was totally visible to civil and military radars. Now, the coup plotters who were flying the F-16s, well, they could have easily tracked and destroyed the plane with Erdogan inside. Because with any coup, you want to cut off the head of the snake. Kill that leader or capture that leader. But this was not done. The Gulfstream managed to land in Istanbul in complete safety on Saturday. And even though the airport was occupied by these individuals who are saying that they're part of the coup. And we also see the Prime Minister, Binali Yildirim, he announced a no-fly zone over Ankara. Well, finally, Erdogan got his no-fly zone. So Erdogan controlled the skies. He was able to fly his plane in. F-16s were flying around. And they never took him out, which is kind of odd. So when we look at this, we see, why wasn't there a leader in all of this? Why was the U.S. corporate media behind Erdogan right from the start? And everything, right from the beginning, was being blamed on Gulen, with no evidence. Just came right out, and that's what Erdogan does. Oh, it was the Islamic State. It was the PKK. Oh, it's Gulen. But there's no evidence whatsoever. So we can see right now that is strange in itself. Then Erdogan went on a rampage, basically purging everyone, military, government offices. He already had prepared arrest lists. Now, of course, the United States is looking at the situation. Erdogan is saying that the U.S. had something to do with it. The United States is saying, oh, absolutely not. We deny all of this, which means they did have something to do with this. And we hear John Kerry out there saying, listen, if Erdogan continues the way he's going, he might be expelled from NATO. But then we heard from Jens Stoltenberg. He denounced the military coup, called the Turkish president, and reminded Erdogan to observe the rule of law, because we know that Erdogan wants to implement the death penalty, and that's against the EU. So we're seeing a lot of chaos in this region. We're seeing that Erdogan had some knowledge. The coup was very amateurish. The U.S. came right out and denied the allegations. And the question is, why did this happen right now? And while all this is happening, we see that Istanbul's deputy mayor was shot in the head today. We see that Turkey raided the Incirlik air base. Now, of course, as we know, it houses U.S. warplanes and 50 to 80 nuclear bombs. Turkey right now is imposing a temporary foreign travel ban on all its civil servants, so nobody can leave. Everyday people are allowed to leave as long as they have the proper paperwork. And we have to see if the U.S. is going to extradite Gulen. So far, they haven't received any of the paperwork from Turkey. But we can see right now, if this was a true coup, and the Turkish president believes the U.S. was involved, we should see the Turkish president say, okay, we want the U.S. out of here. Take your weapons, take your military, and get out of Turkey. And what's very interesting about all of this, Erdogan didn't blame any of this on the Kurds, the PKK. Every other thing that happened in Turkey, which we knew were false flags, he went in, he bombed, he blamed them for everything. But this wasn't. We have to remember, Turkey is a strategic location for the U.S. If the U.S. was behind this by themselves, they had to realize that if this went south, this was not going to go well for the U.S., that there'd be problems where the U.S. would be asked to leave Turkey and they wouldn't have this area. So the U.S. would lose this strategic location. But we need to go back in time here. We need to go back a couple of weeks where Erdogan, out of nowhere, out of the blue, decided, you know what, I'm going to apologize to Russia. And then it was played up in the corporate media. And every time the corporate media grabs hold of a story like this, which is controlled by the U.S. government central bankers, we know something's up. So all of a sudden, he was apologizing, getting closer to Russia. And Putin met with Erdogan, and he started restoring relationship with Erdogan. And this was hyped up in the media. Very interesting. U.S. all of a sudden decided to make this deal with Russia, and it was leaked in the Washington Post, saying that the U.S. now wants to coordinate with Russia. I mean, the U.S. still has demands. The Syrian Air Force needs to be grounded. We can't give you the list separating al-Nusra from the moderate rebels because they're one and the same. They're all terrorist groups. So they leaked this information. Erdogan is making friends with Putin all at the same time. And we see right now that the U.S. is losing their foothold in Syria. They're not even supposed to be there in the first place because they're there illegally. They were not invited. So we have Turkey, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UK, France, the rest of the coalition forces. They have no reason to be in Syria right now, since the Islamic State, which was backed by Turkey, by the United States, by the UK, funded, housed, Turkey purchased the oil, and Russia came out and called out Erdogan on all of this. Erdogan also had Russian jet shot down. And then all of a sudden Erdogan wanted to make up with Russia. Restore friendship. So all of this was happening prior to this coup. And then we had this coup which didn't go anywhere. There was no leader. There were no demands. And it all didn't make sense. But there's a lot of chaos. And there's a lot of purging going on. All at the same time. Then, today, Turkey was caught fabricating a story of who's responsible for the military coup. Where they raided the Incirlik Air Base. They took the chief officer who operated the air base. And the first story came out where that he was in charge and started the coup. Then that story was scrubbed, and a new story was created saying that he was taking orders from Gulen. So all of this doesn't make sense, and now they're erasing stories and erasing what has really happened. Was this created to create chaos in the region? For Erdogan to gain as much power as he possibly can to do what the U.S. wants him to do. Because it's all happening at the point where the U.S. and the coalition forces, there's no reason for them to be in this area at all anymore. The troops don't need to be in Syria. The U.S. doesn't need to be in the Incirlik Air Base to bomb Syria. All of this is being done at this point for a reason. Now, I know everyone is out there and they're saying, well, the U.S. was behind it, or Erdogan was behind it himself, and the U.S., there's going to be tension between Turkey and the U.S. Well, I believe at this point, this is all staged. This is staged to make it look like this, because this is part of their plan that is coming up very soon to go after Assad, to create a wild card, to create chaos, to destabilize the region much further. And we're going to have to watch this to see how this plays out. And this looks like it is the start of it. Now, the Syrian opposition says the U.S. must stand up to Russia, that this deal that they're making is not going to work. There's a CIA officer who's saying that Obama has lost control of the Middle East completely, and things are going to get very ugly very quickly. We see there's reports coming out that there's a new malware which is targeting the energy grid. It can invade the firewalls. It can evade the virus protection. And it is dubbed SFG. And are saying it's coming from a nation state who has the ability to create these. They don't know which one yet. And it's designed to get into the power grid for an extended period of time. And it can bring down the grid very effectively. So it looks like they're going along this path, getting ready for this next false flag event. They're already saying it's created by a nation-state attacker, which could be Russia, China, North Korea, you name it. They're saying that it can evade the firewalls and the virus protection, malware protection. It can get into the system undetected and just bring down the entire grid. So they're building this up already. And we can see right now that everything that they've been telling us is really not true. What happened in Nice, we come to find out that there are no links to any extremist network. The man driving the truck was not part of the Islamic State. That whole thing about the Islamic State taking responsibility is completely fake, phony, and false. It looks like this might have been road rage. It looks like something else might have occurred, that he was put up to it. We know it was a false flag, but this is all being used to convince us that terror is everywhere. And what's very interesting is that 67% of the French don't even trust their government to help them tackle the terrorism problem. And guess what? Governments can't, because they're the ones who are creating the terrorism. They're the ones who are pushing the agenda to scare everyone into doing things they normally wouldn't do, to giving up their rights. And we can see right now they're going to continually do this. It's going to accelerate. We're going to see more of this. I mean, already we're hearing the Islamic State is out there urging the black community to join Islam to fight the U.S. government. Now, of course, this is coming from SITE Intelligence Group, which is run by Rita Katz, which is a Mossad agency for propaganda. And we can see what this is all about. This is about the end game. This is about creating chaos everywhere, so nobody knows what's going on, so they can have their events to cover up this incredible economic collapse. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.